Hi, and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm here today with Tony Blockley. Tony is Professor at the School of Criminology at Leeds Trinity University. That's not all he does, and I'm sure he does a hell of a lot more. But Tony, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Lucy. And what an honour and a privilege it is to be able to talk to you this morning, or talk with you, not at you. So this, let me just be very clear. This isn't a lecture. It's not a sit back. This is what I'm going to talk to you about. I think this is more of a dialogue and a conversation, just to explore some of the some of the challenges and difficulties around domestic abuse. So just to give you some background, I guess. So I was in policing. I did 30 years of policing. I retired at a senior level and was responsible at the time of my retirement for all things public protection. So that was all around children, adults, domestic abuse, child abuse, amongst other things, as well as kind of major serious and organised crime, all those different things that come with that. I went and did some other work, but I've always had a very strong desire to help people. I think that's probably what it is, and particularly around the area of domestic abuse. And I've been on a trustee of a couple of charities, and I still am a trustee of a particular charity locally to me.
Yeah.
So on the back of that, I do work in a university. It is part of education, so it's educating more the wider society. So my kind of area is educating students coming through, but also educating police officers. So we deliver some police education training, or police education, should I say, to our local force here in Leeds. And on the back of that, I've also done some work with other forces, and particularly raising some of the issues around domestic abuse, and particularly domestic homicide.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been doing domestic homicide reviews for quite a number of years, since they kind of really first started in about 2011, and I've probably been involved within one form or another, sort of 60 or 70 domestic homicide reviews, which in itself is a tragedy that there have been so many. But we know statistically just how many murders take place, and then how many of those are related to domestic abuse. And then I'm not going to go into the whole gendered debate around victims and perpetrators, but sufficient to say there are higher numbers of female, and I use the term female in its broadest sense, victims of domestic homicide, and perpetrated by males, and again using the very generic expression. So I think on that basis, and I think it's important that we recognise that, because it's part of my work and findings around domestic homicides really kind of highlight some of those challenges. And some of my work has been around educating officers in really the type of things that may occur, the type of things to look at, the type of things to consider, when attending incidents. And I think it's incumbent on not just police officers, but I think it's all those areas of public
service,
protection, public safety, public service. So whether that's social workers, the health service, GPs, etc., etc. Everybody has a responsibility to understand and highlight any of the issues in relation to domestic abuse, because it's those individuals in those particular areas engage with individuals often at a time of crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
But leading up to that, they've also had engagement with them, and that there are signs often within those engagements that, on reflection, and with hindsight, they could say, oh yeah, well, perhaps I should have recognised this, or perhaps I should have recognised that. Well, this is about saying, stop, think about these things now, and then consider those in the longer term, and kind of almost start that reflection process very, very quickly and very early.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things, and this is, and I'm going to just divert slightly, Lucy. I'm not going to, I'm going to
Go
just
for it.
divert off a
Listen, it's
little
my
bit.
podcast. You can do what you like.
Yeah, well, so I'm going to divert off a little bit, because one of my sort of key thoughts are around about risk and managing risk, because obviously, those services that I've mentioned often engage with individuals at a point of risk, when we manage risk and risk assessment. And if you read the work by Hazel Kempshall, who does an awful lot of work around risk, and particularly risk in social care, and which then translates across all of those different agencies. Risk is a really difficult thing to comprehend, because my interpretation of risk and your interpretation of risk are going to be different.
Yes, absolutely.
So I see risk in a particular way, you see risk in a particular way, and everybody else sees risk in a particular way. But when I attend, so if as a police officer, if I attend an incident, I'm judging risk by what your response is.
Yeah.
Or what I see.
Yeah.
But if you've been a victim, and I use the term victim again in a broader sense, if you've been a victim of domestic abuse over a period of time, your levels of risk, or your levels of appreciation of risk, have actually risen, because it's normalized behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. You've lived with that day in, day out. It's normal to you.
Of course you have.
Yeah.
So actually, we're not all starting at that same level. So somebody might say, oh yeah, there's been nothing wrong, and yet their perpetrator has been abusive, has been shouting, has been smashing things. But because that's something that happens every single day, it's normalized.
Yeah. And then the difficulty then is, how do you then communicate with that victim? Because you can't force anybody to listen, can you?
No, there isn't, and you can't at all. But I think this is why it's incumbent on those professional services to take a more holistic view of what's going on, and have a greater understanding. And the whole point around this education piece is to give that knowledge and those skills to be able to understand in a far more informed way.
Yeah.
And actually, some of those behaviors that we see that are perhaps seen as, well, it's only, are really important. Let me give you an example of that. A review I've conducted previously was involved. The couple had separated, and she was living away from the perpetrator, and there was this distance involved and all that kind of stuff. And the perpetrator had sent a text message, and the text message said, I saw the dog in the window. And that's all it said. So what does that tell the victim? What it tells the victim is, firstly, she's being watched.
Yeah.
Secondly, I can see you whenever I can.
Whenever I want. I'm
Thirdly,
still in control.
You can't escape me.
Yeah.
And all that kind of, those emotions are put into place. This expression that we use now, gaslighting.
Yeah.
But it's what we've done. We've taken technology and using that in our perpetration of domestic abuse. So at one time, it was a very physical act, or accepting that there's coercive and controlling behavior, etc., etc. But you had to be physically present, omnipresent within that, physically present within that relationship.
Yeah.
Whereas now, this omnipresence of technology and messaging, social media, etc., means that I can be anywhere in the world and still be perpetrating domestic abuse against my, against whoever.
Absolutely. I think. Sorry, go on.
No, carry on.
I was just thinking, because I'd done a podcast recently with Charlotte Hooper from the Cyber Helpline, and we were talking about how stalking and harassment is no longer just an in-person crime. You know, this is something that goes on, you know, your social media accounts, your, you know, the trackers, that all the myriad of things that they can use and do to keep an eye on you. And actually, more often than not, then they may not be that tech savvy. There's software, there's apps you can download, spyware you can download, very easy, mirror screening on iPhones. It's actually quite terrifying. And I think the other side for me is, as if you've obviously experienced domestic abuse, is you may not want to be on social media because you don't want to put yourself at risk. But then again, the perpetrator is still in control because you don't feel safe enough to have that normal life of being able to converse with your friends, upload photos, share pictures of your family if you wanted, of your children. You know, if family live all over the world, say it's a very lonely place to be. Very lonely.
I think you're right, Lucy, and I'm just conscious now. I'm just going on complete tangents, and
I love that. That's me, Ronnie Corbett. If anyone remembers Ronnie Corbett with his,
sadly, I do. Yeah, but you're absolutely right, Lucy, because one of the things that happens, isn't it? And this happens time and time again. So where there's and particularly where there's children involved in a relationship, if the victim is part of a family setup and they've got their children, and you know, there's engagement with social care or with children's services or with the police or whatever else it is, our automatic reaction to managing risk is to remove an element. And there's what they call an offender triangle, and I'm sure people will be aware of this. You need an offender, you need a location, but you also need the capable guardian. And this absence of a capable guardian creates this offender, this crime triangle. So what happens is, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll remove one element of that, which is the victim. So we'll send the victim somewhere else in the country. Not the perpetrator or not the person responsible or anything like that. What we'll do is we'll take that person, remove them from their social setting, their support mechanisms, their family, all those different things that we take for granted, put them somewhere completely different where they've got no friends, no communication, and also say, be careful who you talk to because of etc. etc. So, you know, immediately we're isolating those individuals in the context of managing risk, and it's for their benefit, etc., etc. But what we've then got, or what there is then, is this reliance on social media or whatever else it is to communicate. Hence, the whole stalking element becomes very easy, and you can block who you want on social media. You know, we can block whoever, but nobody's ever truly blocked because they just set themselves up on a different name, or they get into your account through a different route, don't they? So. So I think the actual physicality of domestic abuse will always be there. You know, and we've seen some horrendous cases, haven't we? Some really horrendous physical incidents of assaults and beatings, and you know, and all other you know, depraved acts. But I think one of the key things, and this is where I think it's going to be more challenging, is around technology. And actually, if we look at the demographics, so if we look at younger people, you know, who are far more engaged with. So Lucy, in one respect, I'm fortunate because I am old, and older, I should say. Sorry,
older. Yeah, you're not old.
Yeah, well, older.
What is old these days? What is old?
Well, old in my world, Lucy, is I can remember a time when there was no such thing as a mobile phone.
Well, I have to say I didn't have one at uni. I'm with you there.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Or even a computer
or
anything like that. Yeah,
handwritten essays.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's my kind of definition of old. But the point is that young people today, you know, they are tech savvy. They've got technology. They live their lives through a you know, a technical format which is around online presence, whether it's, you know, TikTok, messaging, whatever else it is. I mean, there's a myriad of those different, and they change all the time, don't they? So absolutely, you know, this idea that we can isolate, protect ourselves has become even less, hasn't it? And actually, you know, a lot of people see a lot of things written online, but actually also take them as they read them. So psychologically, it has an impact on you as well. The fact that somebody
Yeah,
says you're this or you're that,
you
or
can't
you
unsee
know,
it.
you can't know. I mean, you know, again, perhaps generationally, I'm somewhat different in as much as you just turn it off
Yeah,
or
yeah,
you ignore it, which is really easy to say
yeah,
if you're in a particular space in time,
yeah.
but really difficult to do when you're not. And
Yeah.
we shouldn't be presumptive that just because I can do it, then everybody else can do it.
And I think as well, you think to the term trauma bonding, which gets, bandied around a lot these days. And the way I was talking about it with somebody recently, it's like you're in a bubble with that person. The outside world is the outside world, but you're in a bubble with that person. And trying to explain trauma bonding to people is really difficult because,
Yeah,
like you've just said, you see a message from somebody, straight away, you're back to where you were in that situation, in that kind of trauma bond. And you can't explain to people why it's not as easy just to turn things off and ignore,
no,
because it's a lot of it is there. It's sort of, it's in your head and it's in your body. It's in every aspect of your adrenaline starts running. You start panicking, you start sweating, and all just from a message. And, I think that's going to be a very difficult thing to sort of get across to people in general. And something else I just thought of then when you were saying about isolating the victim, and that's 100% obviously what happens is they are removed from the situation. But a lot of the time, the family of the victim is still in that area. You have
yeah,
your support network. So the perpetrator is then able to contact them either through social media or text messaging or whatever. And because families don't have the same relationship with the perpetrator, we can't assume that family member doesn't like them or whatever. We don't know, do we? It's a very clever way for the perpetrator to also keep control, is go through the family.
yeah. Oh, well, absolutely. And let's be very clear about this, that you know the perpetrating behavior is around uh, control.
Yeah.
It's around controlling behaviors. It's power and control at every time. And if you look at the power and control kind of wheel, except the Duluth model and all this kind of thing, you can see how behaviors, fit into those various segments around. And you can say, well, actually, yeah, I can see that. I can see that. I can see. I'll give you an example. I was talking. I interviewed a victim many years ago, and this particular person was talking about not being allowed to take a bath. Something as simple as that, not allowed to take a bath. Never been physically assaulted, never, there was no physical abuse. There was financial abuse, there was psychological abuse, coercive, controlling behaviors. And this particular victim, who was an educated person, said that their perpetrator wouldn't let them take a bath. But they went out to work. So they went out to work and took a bath. And there was a whole lot of stuff without going into all the detail. But basically, she didn't have a bath for 6 weeks. So I said, and this is my not my naivety, but I was
Yeah.
asking the
You've not
question.
been through that, so yeah.
No, no, or in that relationship. But I said, why don't you just have a bath?
Yeah. It
Because
seems so simple.
they're out at work, they don't know. Just have a bath. They'll know.
Oh
And
yeah.
such was the power of that this person would not take a bath. And whilst that seems really kind of innocuous, it just demonstrates that the
The
levels
level.
of power and control
Yeah,
perpetrators have, doesn't it? So
absolutely.
let me bring that right back, because it almost sounds like I was doing this uh, on purpose. So when those people from those services, social care, police, whatever else it is, go to a house or go to an incident, and the person says, "Oh well, I'm not allowed to have a bath." What it might be, well, why not just take one,
Yeah.
without understanding. And this is where I think we're missing out on education. It's getting those people in those professional agencies to be able to have a look at the wider and broader implications of what is being said. And it's not, if I come and speak to you, so I'm going to imagine myself as a police officer and visiting you, Lucy, and I say whatever, it's not what you say, it's what you don't say.
What you don't say, yeah.
It's what I observe, and I think that's really, really important. So I've just recently done an online session where I've recorded a piece, and it's been published to police officers in various police forces,
Yeah.
and it was shown to some of our younger police officers locally, and I had an email from that police officer which said, "Thank you very much for your presentation. Some of the things you talked about really could recognise in some of those incidents I'd attended."
It was attended.
And actually, if we make a difference to one or 101,
yeah.
it's about empowering and getting that information out. So, gaslighting, I think, is huge.
Yes.
And actually, that's a massive. What I've also seen is a real increase in, and I'm going to use the term rough sex. Okay, and within that, strangulation.
Yeah.
So strangulation is excused as rough sex. Oh, because they like it, or it's fine. It's just a part of our. And actually, some victims will say, "Oh yeah, but it's okay because it's, she likes it." So they acquiesce, and therefore, actually, what it is, it's really, really dangerous. And it's to me, and this is what I was saying on this presentation. If somebody says that to you, that's a real red flag. It's a real alarm bell.
Yeah.
Because the amount of people that have been murdered as a consequence of that, or they've gone then on to further behaviours, etc. We talk about separation being a key high risk factor, and certainly the either at the time or within a year of separation. Pregnancy is another one.
Very high.
Threats to kill, is another one, etc., etc. But when these professionals are dealing with victims, they are at a point in trauma, aren't they? There's a point in
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
and actually they need to understand the how that time scales. So we know that at the time of an instance, then there'll be a honeymoon period afterwards, and then gradually building up again, and we see
Trying
this
to
all
get
the
back
time.
to that point where you're so happy and everything was wonderful in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if I come and visit you at that point in time when you are really happy, they've said they're sorry, they brought you flowers, they're giving you chocolates, all that kind of thing. It'll never happen again. You've driven me to this, all those
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of excuses, etc., etc. If I come and see you then, what type of responses are you going to give me then? Because they're all going to be, it's all flowers and everything's good and the world is great, and there's no need to be here.
Absolutely.
It's only when we start to really talk and unpick, and I think this is part of the challenges. I'm not sure that those individuals have got the time or sometimes necessarily the understanding in order to have those conversations. Because let's be honest about this, Lucy. This area is scary for people in as much as they're embarrassed to talk about it.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's absolutely. And if you think of somebody that's been in a marriage for, say, 40 years, 50 years, that's normalized behavior, but you could be so embarrassed that you've never spoken about it. You don't want to talk about it.
No. So it's embarrassing for the victim, but it's also for some of the professionals. They see it's embarrassing. Well, I can't ask you about what's going on in your home. I'll ask you some very bland questions, and then depends on what you respond. But I think, and this is one of the things that I really emphasize with practitioners, is what they've got a real opportunity to listen.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually not just, oh, do you feel at risk? No, thanks. Tick, move on, next question. Ask the questions. I did a review of a particular case, and the police, and it was the police attendants, and they had to do what they call a DASH risk assessment, the domestic abuse risk assessment pro forma, and they hadn't completed one. The bottom line is they didn't complete one. And so I asked the question, why was that the case? And they didn't have time to complete it, was the response. They'd been in the house for 2 hours.
Wow. Didn't have time to complete the dash rate. Wow. Okay.
Well, so the point was, and this is, I think, they didn't have the time to sit down and ask the questions. You know, the 27 questions. They didn't have time to go through them all and ask the questions. I'm not being funny. You don't need to ask the questions because I'll have a conversation with you or whoever, and I can fill those questions in.
Yes. Yeah.
But and I think this is now gaining more momentum. Is what about our professional opinion?
Yeah.
You know, our professional thoughts, because actually there's, you know, we talk about instinct, don't we? And we talk about a sixth sense and gut instinct and all this kind of stuff. And I think as professionals, you know, the more experience you have, the more, you know, you'll talk to somebody, you think, oh, there's something not quite right there, whatever else it is. You know, that whole element of professional curiosity, that professional thought needs to really, really come out. And actually, yes, I've ticked all the boxes and you've come out at a medium or a low or whatever else it is, but there's something in it.
But what does your gut say?
Yeah. I think it's high.
Yeah.
And I can articulate it to a point, but I can't articulate it further than that. Well, to me, that's okay.
Yeah. Because you're erring on the side of caution, aren't you?
Well, yeah, to an extent, but you're also using your past experiences, knowledge, etc., and your education in order to make, because we don't get sixth sense or gut feeling without having experienced it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I use the analogy of a fire. So let me use this one as a wolf. This is a different one. If you're in a room and a wolf runs in, you know, big snarling, big yellow teeth and all that kind of stuff, what do?
You're going to run.
Yeah. Why do you run?
Because you're frightened.
Yeah. And why are you frightened?
Because it's scary and it's big and it's going to hurt you.
Yeah. And yet, we've probably never come into contact with a wolf before.
No.
So actually, you know, we've been told all this information.
Yeah.
We've been said, don't do this. You know, don't stick your hand in the fire because it will burn. I mean, some people have stuck their hand in the fire or grabbed something and you realize it's hot. I'm not doing that again. But, you know, this is what we grow up with, a lot of this information, don't we?
Yeah.
We drive to places and we don't even think about where we're going because it's automated.
It's in us. Yeah.
It is, absolutely. And this is exactly the same. So all we're doing is harnessing that idea of knowledge and experience in a way which benefits our thought processes. And it might well be we get it wrong.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, you know, hopefully 99% of the time we do get it wrong. But on that one occasion you get it right and you prevent something happening, that's the key bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that we're able to, and sometimes you might not be able to articulate that. But the point is that we're in a position where we can say, you know what, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that's and
I think there's a whole lot of stuff around this. So you know, I've talked about non-fatal strangulation, which is another one. I think there are some really other key risk factors. So previous domestic abuse perpetration. You know, and it doesn't matter. Oh well, it was only an argument. It's around an escalation of behaviours and that kind of thing. And if you look at Jane Monckton Smith's work around the 8 stages of the homicide, you know, that clearly identifies and lays out what those 8 stages are. I think, you know, and some of the challenges we have today, more than perhaps, I won't say more than we've had previously, but we're probably more aware of them now around mental health and mental well-being.
Yeah.
You know, and what do they look like? And it's not necessarily the mental health of the perpetrator, albeit that's perhaps a separate argument, but it's also the mental health impact it has on the victim.
Yeah.
But also, and we are seeing more, I think, of where victims see no other way out than taking their own life.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
again, how does that play out in
Mm.
this world of understanding, the challenges?
Mm.
We know about coercive and controlling behaviours, alcohol abuse, drug misuse, all those key things, and particularly when you've got alcohol and drug misuse,
Together. Yeah.
and together, because that's again, a really complex issue. And then if you throw into that, this, as they describe, this toxic trio. So you've got the mental health, alcohol, and drug misuse. It's a really toxic environment, and I don't mean that in a blaming way, but it's
No.
just the reality that it's about vulnerability, and it increases people's vulnerability, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff going on, and then, like you say, you throw separation into it, and stalking,
Yeah.
harassment, all those things. It's a massive, massive area,
It is.
and it's important that as professionals they start to understand these key components and don't treat things in isolation.
Yeah. Yeah, because very often with domestic abuse, things aren't in isolation. There's
Of
a,
course they're
like
not.
you've just said, the complexities. It's here, there, and everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we, again, as professionals, we need to recognize that, and it might be that you can only go so far, you can only do so much,
Mm.
but it's important that you do it.
But yeah,
And
exactly.
and it might be saying, look, I really think that, this is the case, and that person might say, look, thanks for that,
Mm.
but I'm okay.
Yeah.
We can't force people to do things.
No. And I think on the flip side, almost, if a victim is willing to talk, which obviously sometimes it does happen, I think it's important that they don't get their hopes up, if you like. If
Yeah.
they're in that situation where the incident's occurred, it's all very traumatic, everything's in crisis, that they understand that there is a process. I think that's a big one I've come up against a few times, is when I work for my local domestic abuse charity, is it's very difficult to, you can't promise a victim or survivor something.
No.
You have to just listen. You need to build that trust with them. I think trust is a big one, isn't it? And especially if it's the police, say, for example, that are involved, that a lot of the time it gets passed on to different officers, and then the victim or survivor doesn't know who they're speaking to, and it all gets very kind of muddled. And I think that's the difficulty, is keeping that consistency, which isn't easy because people move around, people change jobs. It's so hard to not make promises you can't keep. Do you know what I mean? And be able to say, this is the process. Because just as an example, I'm thinking of, would somebody know the difference between, say, a FWIN, like a force-wide incident number, and a crime reference number? They might not. It's those kind of things that I think would be useful to be explained to victims at the start, if they are, want charges pressing, etc. If they want to go further, that they understand the process. Because I think a lot of the time the process is just assumed, and then they get themselves in an absolute state, not knowing what's happening next. And I know that's a lot to ask, and in a nice world, it'd be wonderful to do all that. It's probably not what a police officer's thinking of when they're in the middle of dealing with an incident.
No, I think you're right, Lucy, and I think some of it is, no, they might not be, and let's, if we break it down into its component parts, if it's, we'll take police as an example, but it could be social care, it could be whoever else. But at the point of trauma, you're dealing with that traumatic incident, and you're actually managing that traumatic incident, and then it's it's that follow-on piece, isn't it? That follow-up care, that communication, because we talk about empathy and we talk about communication skills and communication styles, and it is really, really hard. If I, as a police officer, I'm 6'2", I am what I am, I'm the size I am. If I walk in, that can be quite a challenging, complex, because actually the person that has perpetrated may, we might mirror each other, we might look exactly the same. So how does somebody who's just been abused trust somebody who looks exactly the
Acting
same
like the
as,
perpetrator.
you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so actually, you know, our levels of empathy have to be far higher, but also just recognizing that or understanding that is important. You
Yeah.
know, and I think it is, because not everybody is an abuser.
No.
You,
No, and then you will be
you know,
cases
and that's
where
the
it isn't.
reality.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things Mark Brooks talks about in his podcast was about believability. You know, I think a lot of the time, if and not just police, like you say, social services, whoever are involved, if you're talking to people, very often, say, for example, the victim might feel that they won't be believed, you know, and that can be so difficult to think, well, how else can I prove it other than what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sometimes they say nothing and sometimes they'll say quite a lot. But I think it's knowing through the process how to listen, isn't it? And also, don't be surprised at what you hear, because I often say truth is stranger than fiction. And somebody could say to me, think it sounds so pie in the sky and so out there. Like you say, you know, the example with the I can see the dog in the window. You just think, oh, what? But actually, that is something that is it is abuse. It is
Yeah.
control. It is making sure that they know that they've got their eye on you and they're keeping tabs. And that's hard. I think it's you're right, it is. It's education, definitely. It's that training and understanding that it isn't just that stigma we have of somebody being hit and has a black eye or a bruises or covering it all. Yes, that is 100% for a lot of people how it happens, and physical abuse is very serious, obviously. But there are other elements to it. And all the other components, like I say, that come into play, like the financial abuse, the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse, the sexual abuse. You put all that together, and it's not unusual for somebody to go through all of those and experience all of those abuses. It doesn't have to just be one, does it? More often than not, it is many of them. Then you've also, I suppose, in a way, need to understand and be educated in all those areas to see how they all kind of fit into the jigsaw. Does that make sense?
No, I absolutely does, Lucy, and I think this is where you know, education is a key element to this, isn't there? And you know, let's be honest, as you know, from a policing perspective, you know, far more calls for service for domestic abuse than there is. You know, it's one of the higher crime types, and I think the bit that we need to really emphasize is that education, and it's not just police, it is social care, it's children's services,
GP,
GPs.
hospitals,
You know, GPs are a really important factor in this, because actually people will present to their GP, you know, in a you know, I can talk to the doctor because it's confidential. Well, it's confidential in as much as you can talk to me, but if something is said that I need, you know, which raises elements of risk, you know, it's not secretive. I need to explore and I need to explain that, don't I? But and also hospitals, you know, presenting at A&E, and you know, if we look and again looking at some of the homicide reviews, is that the perpetrator has acted as the translator in instances, or gone along with the partner, you know, as their support mechanisms, etc., etc. Well, you know, and I know there's some fantastic things that have been put out there, you know, around how to raise, and particularly in some of the maternity wards, you know, around when the individual has to go and be examined on their own or whatever else it is. There's some, you know, signs that they can do, and I saw one the other day which I thought was fantastic, and that was it was on a coffee cup, and it was a Starbucks coffee cup, and somebody had written, you know, I can see you're not comfortable with this individual. If you want us to call the police or interject, let us know. So, you know, those type of things, and we've had the, you know, the various campaigns, Ask for Angela, and you know, various other things that are going on, which is great, and it's raising that awareness. But what we're saying is, it's the victim that's got to make those calls.
Put it all back on the victim.
And actually, what we should be saying is that as professionals, this is what we should be looking at. One of the constant things I kind of have explained to me as well, you know, I've got lots of different incidents I have to attend. I've only got so much time, and the GP will say, you know, I've only got
20
whatever it
minutes or
is,
something,
5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever else it
I'm
is.
being excessive there, 20 minutes.
I know, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
We wish.
But I guess the point is, if those individuals spent a little bit more time and really got to the, you know, understand it, etc.,
Yeah.
then it might prevent them having to go back time and time
And
again,
again,
or
yeah.
might having to re-engage with the GP or whatever else it is.
And it
So I think
escalates.
there is,
Yeah.
it comes back to that point you made earlier on, Lucy, which was around our communication skills, our communication style, and what are we trying to get in terms of communication? If
Yeah.
all it is tell me what happened and then I can decide whether it's a crime or not a crime, end of story. Well, they're going to be very limited questions. If it's going to be, you've asked me here because of this incident, and I need to understand what's happening so that I can assess the risk to you and to your family and everything else, that's a different conversation, isn't it?
It is.
And I think we have to recognize that, though, that second type of conversation is harder.
It
You
is.
know, and we really need to kind of work on how we have those conversations, but also how we recognize some of those signs.
Yeah. And do you think that there'll be any, because obviously, excuse me, because I'm obviously a bit naive in all this myself, but that there will be some kind of training program, if you like, as well as obviously within universities, if you're teaching policing and investigation criminology, you're working around that. For the police officers, say, as an example, or social workers, will there ever be a day, do you think, where there will be some forms of training programs for the existing members of staff who are already out there, if you like, in the field dealing with it and not really knowing what to look for when they're dealing with a call out to something?
Yeah, so there's an extensive program which is developed and delivered by Safe Lives, and DA Matters. It's, you know, that's the flagship. And they go, and I know that a lot of police forces are going through, you know, raising this awareness and giving this information and giving this training element. But I think, and again, this is about, it's okay, and we know, we've been into some training sessions, whatever else it is, and you sit there and you think, well, that's great, move on.
Yeah.
But it's about how do we explore and demonstrate the importance of this, and I'm not saying that is not happening, because I'm sure it is in vast numbers of cases. And the cases I have been involved with from a homicide perspective, of course, are those where sadly somebody has had their life taken, however that's happened. But the point is that they're a minority. They're a minority of cases. And in fact, statistically, only because I looked this up, domestic homicides in April 21 to March 22.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this only because that's, you know, one is too many. I think there was 134 domestic homicides, which was 29% of all homicide victims.
Right.
So it's still a high number. And then when you break that down, of course, the higher percentage is always the female victim and the male perpetrator.
Yes.
And again, that's the reporting characteristic. So they use the term female and male.
Yeah.
In those reporting terms for the Home Office.
Yeah.
So,
and how many people, you know, we know this, don't we? How many people don't report on every side?
Absolutely.
In terms of every gender, who doesn't report?
You're right, and there is a change now. There's a change of emphasis, and they're revisiting the definition of domestic homicide, and there's a consultation out at the moment where it's looking at where people have committed suicide as a result of, and it's very specific. You know, you have to be 16 or over, and it's either in a personal relationship, in a house, or living with somebody, etc. So I think it's trying to expand that out as well a lot more, because you don't. it's such a vast area, isn't it? And actually, I think I think it'll get more.
Yeah.
And if we look at where society is and some of the challenges, financially, where people are,
Widen the net, doesn't it? Definitely to get those.
occupationally, emotionally,
Mm.
relationships wise, I think this is going to change. I mean, it always makes me smile, almost like sounds as if I'm enjoying it, but it doesn't. It makes me angry smile, and that angry smile is, why do we always say aim it at the victim? Where are any of the messages around behaviors of perpetrators? Where are messages around, the way that, relationships and the roles of people in those relationships? And actually, it's not about the victim. It's about the person shouldn't be doing that type of thing.
Do you know what? Something just come to then, and again, I could be 100% wrong, and you can completely disagree with me because I love this. Obviously we agree on most things, but I was just thinking in terms of when you're saying about the victim, and we always choose to speak to the victim. If you've ever, as you have obviously, and myself, but if you come into contact with a perpetrator, trying to reason with a perpetrator, I'm trying to think of something. It's like trying to wrestle, I don't know, an alligator or something. You can't do it. You can't. No. It's very difficult to have that conversation because they are so in their own. They have no empathy, no compassion, no understanding. Everything is about them and what they want. Like you say, it's all about power and control. So is it that maybe we go for the easy option of the victim rather than focusing on the perpetrator, who very often is cunning, and can tie you up in knots? We know this. That's what gaslighting's all about. That's what coercive control is all about. Is it that the victim is the easier option because they have been abused? So therefore, maybe they are a bit more pliable in terms of talking to them and dealing with them. A perpetrator, I always say that, they have a tongue like a corkscrew. They could just keep going all day and you wouldn't have a clue. You'd be, by the end of it, you'd be blaming yourself.
Sorry, Lucy.
I just wondered. It was me having one of these thoughts, thinking why we don't focus so much on the perpetrator.
I think you're absolutely right, and if you look at perpetrators, the psychological, around narcissistic, manipulative, all those different things that you around power and control, ownership, all those different things. So what we as a society, and I use this term more broadly, look at is, where is that path of least resistance? And that path of least resistance is always with the victim. And particularly when there's children involved.
Yes.
Because actually, if you don't do this, we will take your children off you.
Yeah.
So actually, they're them being compliant. So I often say to professionals, at what point does the help become the perpetrator?
Yeah. Oh, that's so true.
And I don't mean that I'm not being in a derogatory way or anything else, but actually, what are we doing? What are we as professionals doing, which is different to the perpetrator in terms of power and control, coercive and controlling behavior? Because what we're saying is, you need to move.
You've got to move. We'll take your children away from you if you don't
person. You've got to leave this house.
Yeah.
Etc., etc., etc. And perhaps our legislative response to this is that we need to be more focused on preventing perpetrator behaviours and restricting perpetrators rather than having to move the victim, because we're removing the problem, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit like, I use it, and this is a really poor analogy, and I accept it is, but it's like you drive down the street every day and there's a big pothole, and you drive through the pothole every day and you burst your tyre and you just keep replacing the tyre.
Yeah.
Fill the pothole in.
Just
the perpetrator is the pothole. Deal with that perpetrator.
Yeah.
And some of it might be because that's the only behavior that they understand and know, because it might be that they've been a victim or within a household of
domestic abuse. And it's learned behavior from childhood. Oh God, yes, that's a big one for me.
And a whole lot of it, a lot of more knowledge now around ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and the impact that they have. So it might be that we need to educate them in a more positive way around roles and behaviours and that kind of thing. So
Do you know
rather,
what? Yeah. Sorry, go on.
no, go on.
I was just thinking when in quite a few of the podcasts I've done, one thing I come back to regularly is we educate, because obviously the society we have now, well, we can do our best to help, we can do our best to educate, train, etc. It's those who are primary school age at the moment who, you could look at a classroom of 30 children and statistically, how many of those children are going to be living in a domestically abusive household? Probably more than 2 or 3, maybe. And when you look at the fact that by the time they get to secondary school, that's where they have the healthy relationships talks, that's where the support services go in and come and talk about it. But where is that conversation in, say, year 6, before they're starting secondary school, before everything changes? We all know how much, I've got a young one about to start secondary and I'm already going, oh God, I've been there once with my 17-year-old, and it is a massive change. And there's a lot that's going on hormonally for them. There's a lot, and add to that domestic abuse in a household, or not even just in the household. If that child is the victim of post-separation abuse as well, and they're being pulled here, there, and everywhere by the perpetrator, then for that child, where is their understanding of how to set those boundaries for themselves to say, actually, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I don't agree with the way you've just said that, because the way you've just spoken to me isn't the way that my other parent would speak to me. I think it's to educate those at an age where I think 10, 11 is a decent age to be able to know well, we say, don't we, from the age of 7, the difference between right and wrong. But if children were educated in terms of their boundaries, in terms of what isn't acceptable in any relationship, it doesn't matter if it's your friendships, it doesn't matter if it's your parents, your grandparents, whoever it is, that's one I'm very passionate about. If that was something that was in the curriculum that was discussed and talked about, then maybe we'd have a chance of helping even more children that could be at risk and may end up in a better situation for being more informed. That's just.
Well, I absolutely agree, Lucy. And actually, what it then creates is this image of education. What is education? Because education is a formal process, isn't it? Which is your schools and nurseries, etc., etc. But where do we get the most of our information and our education from? It's through our friends, family, online now, because my daughter doesn't watch TV. She just watches videos on YouTube and that kind of thing. And
people meet on
let's be
Instagram
honest,
and Snapchat and all these
I
things.
know exactly.
Crazy.
If you want to do something at home now, you don't have to get a book out and read how to do it. You just put a YouTube video on and say, "Oh yeah, I can see how it works now."
Yeah.
But then, so let's bring that back then. So who are the greatest influencers for our young people? And if we look at some of those individuals, and say, well, actually, these are deemed role models, and you think, wow, that's shocking, because actually they're displaying aggressive, sexist, misogynistic, all those behaviors which are seen as trendy and cool and all that kind of thing, and that's what we're trying to sort of say is okay. And that's part of that challenge, I think, Lucy, is, well, what is education? And particularly for some people who are physically in that space, because they live in a household where there is domestic abuse, or their family, or they see it, or they hear it, or whatever. It just goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it will have that.
And I think when I do look at the vast majority of people that have perpetrated in these domestic homicide reviews have there has been domestic abuse in their history and in their background. That doesn't mean to say that everybody that's been in a family where domestic abuse has taken place becomes a perpetrator. Absolutely not. But the non-scientific evaluation that I can do of the ones that I've done is very much a case of, well, there was domestic abuse present in their
In their home,
in their homes, in their households.
And
So learn behavior, isn't
learn
it?
behavior. That's the scary thing for me. And I find myself sometimes, you look at a class of children, you think, how many of those are going to turn out to be either a perpetrator or a victim? That's the way my weird mind works, unfortunately. But it's true, because they don't come off the wind. They come from somewhere, and the backgrounds that they have, unfortunately, more often than not, potentially have an impact, like you say, on how they see the world and how they think it's acceptable to speak to another human being or treat another human being.
And I think that's the key point, Lucy, is they don't know any different.
No.
So it's not that they're purposely displaying those behaviors. It's the fact that they don't know any different. And it's not about blaming the perpetrator or blaming the victim. It's about recognizing that everybody has gone through a different journey to get to where they've got to, and actually those stages in that journey have had influence and impact on them, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So that's part of it, isn't it, as well?
It is, definitely. And I think that's the almost the sad thing in many cases with perpetrators is we all have choices, don't we? We all have choices in how we choose to behave. And unfortunately, more often than not for a perpetrator is because, for example, like you say, if they've lived in a household where there is that behavior displayed, then they make that choice to behave in that way. That that's.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not to contradict, but I think when we use the term choice, what we often think about, should I, shouldn't I, and I'll think about it, etc., etc. Should I eat that piece of cake or not? Well, if I eat the cake, I'll put 3 stone on whatever it is, etc., etc. I think sometimes some people don't necessarily have the capability or capacity in order to make those decisions. So actually, choice is a very
that's interesting, because you hear a lot of people use that, don't you? You hear a lot of people say, well, it's a choice, they choose to behave that way. It's interesting.
It's only a choice if you understand the different dynamics attached to each of those choices and everything else. And actually, sometimes there is no choice, because the choice is taken away from you, or well, that's always happened, therefore it's not a choice. Do you know what I mean? And so I think,
and on both sides, like you say, is that then the case for perpetrator and victim, that there is?
Well, I think it absolutely is, Lucy, and I don't think we can say that if we get to this position where all perpetrators are the same and all victims are the same, we're never going to be there, because we're not. We're all human beings. We're all different. We've all got different influences, etc. And whilst we might have certain shared values and shared understanding and shared kind of belief systems, it's not everything. My belief systems and my, some people might say, well, they're flawed.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that, because they might say, well, you need to have a look at things in a different way. Well, that's fine. Yeah, because everybody's opinion is important.
I think that's us getting to an age where, and I said this with Mark Brooks, I said, you do get to a point in your life, and I think it's very much around about the mid-40s, where you just go, I don't give a monkey's what anyone thinks.
Well, yeah,
that's the point I'm at.
That's kind of dangerous ground a little bit, Lucy. I think there's also,
but maybe that's my learned behavior from my previous experience.
Yeah, well,
I just don't care.
Yeah, but I think there is something around understanding the impact of some of the things that you might say or do, and I'm really conscious of that. As a person within education and educating individuals, I'm really conscious of the impact that I have on those individuals. Around raising that awareness and making sure that I'm quite passionate about this, but making sure that passion doesn't become bias.
Yes.
And actually it's my way or no way, because that's just me then becoming coercive and controlling and a narcissist, etc. So actually it's more about, have you thought about it in this way, or have you thought about it in this way? What about this, or what about that?
Options. It's options,
exactly. And also thinking about potentially the consequences.
Cause and effect. Absolutely. It's
so that's really where it's coming to. So it's not banging the table, you will do it this way. I mean, I grew up in a world in my policing career where it was very much banging the table and you'll do it this way. That was the way it was. In my early career. In my latter career it was very different, but in my early career that's the way it was. And thankfully we're beyond that. And thankfully now there is more accountability. And with that accountability comes responsibility, and with that responsibility comes the need to have that education and knowledge in order to make those informed decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, and that's where I see my role within this education and within this process, in order to share those experiences, but allow people then to draw their own kind of ideas and thoughts around it.
And
Which,
you can't, with all the will in the world, we can't, like you just said before, you can't tell people what to do. You can only give them the tools and say, these are the options you have. These are the complexities of abuse. And, I would find it very difficult in this day and age to be a police officer. I don't envy them the tasks they have. And that's only talking about domestic abuse, let alone every other area they have to deal with. This is just one aspect. And I think it's a very, very tough job to do, and I think it's very difficult, and especially when perpetrators can be very charming, and there's all those, the charming is disarming, somebody once said to me, and I said this, I was a guest on a podcast recently, and I was talking about this person years ago said to me, charming is disarming, and I thought, why would you want to disarm someone? Why would you want to do that? And it's because it's that perpetrator nature of thinking, I'm going to make you vulnerable, and I'm going to basically then be able to do whatever the hell I like and power and control. So, it is difficult when you are faced with a perpetrator that is, and sometimes they're in positions of power, as we know, hiding in plain sight, and they're very, very charismatic, very come across as, oh, you couldn't believe for 1 second they could ever behave in such a way. It's a very, very difficult thing to dismantle, I think, and try and take apart, definitely.
Well, I think it is, Lucy, and what we've got to be really careful of, isn't it, that we don't all say that. I mean, it always strikes, and again, domestic abuse is it's not postcode related. It's
absolutely not.
Socioeconomically related or anything like that. It happens to everybody across all areas.
That's the stigma, isn't it? That it's a stereotype.
I think we hear more about it from certain areas because there's not the same isolation. So if I drive up a particular road, or wherever else it is, and you've got big houses and big driveways, and you're not going to hear anything from in those houses. Whereas actually, if I drive down a street where houses are virtually next to each other, or indeed attached, whatever else it is, I am going to hear more of that. So, and so I think it's really important that we recognise that anybody, irrespective of background, socio-economic positions, like you say, those positions of power and etc., anybody can be a victim, and anybody can be a perpetrator. And it's not just looking and saying, oh, you are, because, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think sometimes maybe it is difficult for people who are in a position, like you say, that live in those big houses potentially, because the assumption then is, well, you're educated, surely you've got a career, you're professional, surely you've spotted the signs, surely you could see that coming, and that to me, I always find really offensive, because I think, well, then clearly you've never been in a situation where you've been abused, because it is not, it's all right to say the red flag. I did a post on LinkedIn the other day talking about it's okay to say the signs were there. And I think the way I worded it was, but when those signs come wrapped in a package that resembles protection, when in fact, actually what it is possession, then it's very difficult for you to differentiate the two. Because if someone has you believing that they are protecting you and taking care of you, then how you then realize that actually is just possession, and they need to be in control of you all the time. I think I ended it by saying what we need to do with the package is say return to sender.
Well, I think often we say the signs were there because we then look at things with hindsight. And you can. I mean, crikey, it's not just around domestic, a whole lot of things in life, isn't there? If the signs were there, we wouldn't have done this, or we'd have done something different. And domestic abuse is no different to that. But again, it comes back to, like, as you quite rightly say, sometimes you don't want to see those signs.
No.
Because for whatever reason, or the person is very good at hiding those signs, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think one word that comes up very frequently when we talk about domestic abuse is insidious, isn't it? It's that slowly. I did a podcast with Sam Fisher, who's the CEO at Trafford Domestic Abuse Service, where I volunteered and then worked, and we were talking about that drip effect. You know, it's, if people think it happens overnight and all of a sudden that person, like they do in the films, within the space of a couple of hours they become abusive, that's not how it is. It's a very very careful process that's crafted over time, and that's how it's so hard to detect, because it's being almost drip fed to you, really. And it's very, very difficult then to pick that apart. But yeah, I think we need to do another podcast, Tony. I'm going to line us up another one. We just need to think what we're going to talk about next.
Well, I'm sure there's lots to talk about, Lucy. We've got
definitely, absolutely
scratched the surface.
Oh my, I know. Well, I'm already into season 2, and I'm thinking, how have I done that? I only started a few months ago. But no, thank you so much, and we will book in another one, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, thanks so much, Tony. Thank you.
All right, no worries, Lucy.